Fonseca Castro, Jorge, from Universidad Complutense de Madrid, Department of Applied Economy, Structure and History, Faculty of Economics. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for inviting me. In particular, I thank the Latin American side that has asked me. I'm an Argentine Spaniard. I'm also Latin American and European at the same time. And I'm here as an academic, really, as part of the human population. That's how I wish to address you today. Now, what we're talking here about is proposing a sustainable advancement of society and moving forward Latin America and the rest of the world. And in order to do this, we need equitable, fair trade agreements that serve the population. Now, this has been quite obvious when we look at how the EU-MERCOSUR negotiations have developed. But if we compare that to the reality, it's quite distant from what we see there. The treaties that are currently in force, others that are still on the way and in the pipeline, are asymmetrical in terms of the trade relations. Industrialized countries are providing industrial goods, and from the periphery we get the natural resources, and some populations are negatively impacted by this. It may seem obvious. In the European positive population, the extractive logic, it's beneficial economically and socially, and the food prices and energy prices are being driven up. We've seen this in Spain and elsewhere in Europe in recent times. Now, the Ukraine war may have played a part, but that's just marginal. In Latin America, it's harmful to have this kind of relation because it's reminiscent of the colonial relationships of the colonial past, because the colony was all about this kind of change. It was natural resources being extracted and sent away, and industrial goods that were being provided, whether it's fisheries, mining, or hydrocarbons. It's the cereal exports. Well, what is it? Soy. What's it used for? To feed poor pigs in Europe and in China. That's the main purpose. So what we have is a primarization of the economy in Latin America. And this kind of agriculture that's based on synthetic toxic fertilizers and products and additives and GM model actually uses about 50% of the water that's being extracted and using the resources, and it's producing but mainly animal feed by 80%. And in fact, the meat that is produced actually contains only about a third of the protein that was fed into it, which is absurd. If you look at the billions of people that are going hungry, and the billions that are suffering from a food shortage, what we're doing is stopping the growing of foodstuffs and driving up inflation and causing food insecurity and causing economic crises in growing nations. Really, it's just an elite market that's being fed. And it's all about the transnational corporations having tailor-made legislation, provided them with special courts that are just functioning on the margins of what's legal, and you people being asked to change their constitutions without the actual electorate being consulted on such constitutional changes. Well, there you have it. And that's all the work of people who are close to the corporations themselves and who have ties to those forces and those lobbies. Well, that's all there in the treaties. It's being used to control the people, to control the markets, through the resources and trade of resources between the US, China, the European Union, and also the Latin American elite, and the global north, if you like, which is, of course, all over the world, including in Europe. You know, we've got mining and oil resources that are being extracted to the detriment of other sectors, with the customs effects and social dumping resulting. And ultimately, it's the traditional sectors that are being swallowed up, and they're being swallowed up elsewhere too in the global south and in the center of the system as well. You know, we're seeing investment, foreign investment, that's high yield, and so we know that in the medium term it's going to replace the investment, and it's going to cause flight of capital, inflation, and tax fiscal crisis. We know this. It's a cycle. We're familiar with it in Latin America, and right now Argentina is living this kind of crisis, but other countries too. So what are the consequences then of these trade agreements, these neoliberal forms of investment? You've got the economic destabilization and the weakening of democracy, amongst other effects. Yes, these treaties themselves are destroying democracy, sometimes in extreme cases leading to coup d'etat in order to replace local people, leaders, in order to keep people in power who support the new colonial vision that's behind it. Now, if you look at the coup against Evo Morales, that was no doubt backed by thinking related to lithium. We know Argentina and Chile and others are in the lithium triangle, where about 60 to 80% of the global lithium reserves are located. Well, in Argentina, in the province of Jujuy, the governor there, Morales, is actually repressing the local population and violating human rights, because no doubt there are some personal interests at stake with regard to the lithium reserves that are located in that province. These imbalances with Latin American trade causes vulnerability, and means that it's just a handful of the super rich that can get their hands on all this wealth, and they can dominate the economic system and the political system as a result. Now, public debt and this handle on interruption from the chair.
Professor, 1 more minute. We're a little bit over. Sorry.
Es clave en la dominación política global.
Now, the real consequence of this model of consumption it just plays out in the inequality models and statistics that were presented by Andrea. And there's no coincidence when you look at the level of equality in Latin America. Soy exports for animal feed, destroying forests in order to do this. The droughts, lack of water resources, we're seeing extreme drought in some regions, and the CO2 emissions caused by this. And you have, on top of that, the water consumed in order to extract lithium. The consumption model that all of these treaties fall within cause the deaths of thousands of environmentalists, the natural disasters, mass extinction of different species and disasters, and climate disaster on the global level. And ultimately, it can lead to the extinction of the human species. And 1 million species have been wiped out as a result of this model in recent years. Now, to conclude, this model is quite simply unsustainable. It's capitalism, it's a socio-economic and environmentally unsustainable policy. The current crisis is a crisis of all the past civilizations, of privatization of public goods. Water, air, soil, knowledge belong to all of humanity, and therefore We must create a model of fair trade, new production and consumption models based on genuine, actual, fundamental needs to sustain human life. Health, education, culture, housing, the provision of water, all of these are basic services. We have to put the human being at the center of policy making, both at the national and international level, which means that you have to return public goods to humanity, return water, healthcare, education, knowledge. All of these are being privatized. Human intelligence is being turned into a commodity. People talking about artificial intelligence. Well, it's not artificial intelligence. It's the sum total of knowledge that's been gathered over hundreds of years. And all of this is being privatized, being appropriated in order to deprive human beings of their work, their own freedom to work and create. And that's why we have to abandon this idea of GDP growth. And I'm really finishing with this last sentence. We have roadblocks, we have traffic jams causing pollution, death, and illness, and that's just one of many consequences. Thank you very much.
Professor, thank you for your passionate discussion, and we're going to have some questions now. Let me just clarify, because I think